Thank you, Mayor Caniff. We have one deputation this evening. It is with regards to item 13D, the financial resiliency and COVID-19. It has been submitted by Henry Savek, spending cuts to assist with deficit. Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for your efforts during these difficult times. I am presenting this solution as a beginning to restore credibility and leadership opportunities for you. Unlike others in your position of influence, choosing the path I am about to suggest will require courage and personal sacrifice. Few in public office are willing to take on such a task. I am asking that elected council and the mayor declare a 20% reduction in their salaries effective immediately. I am also asking administration to be required to work a 4-day week, 8 hours per day, resulting in a forfeit of 20% of their wage salaries as well. I totally understand if your answer is no to this. It would be a difficult personal sacrifice. However, it would place you somewhat within the same context as millions of Canadians and thousands of Chatham-Kent residents who are unable to open the doors of their businesses or work full-time. The most important result of such action, if taken, is for the residents of Chatham-Kent to again begin to develop some level of confidence in their elected representatives. I am asking you to provide the residents with this symbolic action. No studies, no committees, simply stand up and take the pledge to cut your salaries by 20%. Thank you and have an amazing evening, Henry Savek.
Okay, we'll move to the consent agenda. The motion will be put up on the screen. There's been 2 items currently pulled, 11B and 13D. So we need a motion to accept all the other items that are listed here. Councillor Finn.
Happy to make that motion.
Okay, can we get a seconder from Councillor McGrail?
I will second.
Okay, anyone against? Oh, sorry, we're going to do a vote here.
Okay, Council, please vote and don't forget to hit the submit. All votes are in. And motion passes.
Okay, we'll go to 11B.
Tender award, contract award T20-183, New Fleet Garage, 50 Siemens Drive. And Council, I'd just like to clarify there is an amendment to recommendation 1 of that report, clarifying that the 4.2 million that was indicated in the report is broke out into the construction cost and the architect cost. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Councillor Hall, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I hit the hand button instead of the mute button. Yeah, I'll move the recommendations to get the motion on the floor.
Okay, and can I get a seconder from Councillor Sakachi?
I will second it to get it on the floor as well.
Okay, Councillor Hall, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor Caniff. I have a few questions here coming from some concerns and questions from the community. So first, I heard from some local residents in Wallaceburg who had questions about the year-round impact of relocating the yard equipment currently on the Gillard Street location to a new yard in Chatham. So my question to staff, what impact would this have on response times to winter road maintenance, water main breaks, that sort of thing, et cetera, which are currently responded to from the Gillard Street location?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Kevin Rankin, Manager of Fleet Service, responding. We don't anticipate any time lost as we have mobile mechanics currently responding to all these repairs. And after our calls, these same technicians will be available 24/7.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rankin. And also kind of similar question, but what about street sweepers, sewer maintenance, that sort of thing? Will there be any lost work time, I guess, due to travel to and from Wallaceburg? or does this move basically centralize it more and cut down on any lost work?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, keep in mind, to answer that question, the equipment still will be domiciled in Wallaceburg. It would just be the repair shop moving to Chatham, and their response time would remain the same. Those same street sweepers will still be housed in the Wallaceburg Public Works Garage.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Kevin. That answers those questions for sure. And also, I know all of council received an email today from some individuals as well, and I heard from some Wallaceburg residents who were concerned, I guess, that we were going to be moving forward with this, this multi-million-dollar report and that sort of thing, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. So, obviously, we have another report that we'll be discussing with all the financial hardships that we're facing right now. So that being said, what would that look like if we, if we didn't move forward with this right now? I know it's a contract award, but if we were to push this back or delay this in some way until we have a better handle on what the financial situation is, what would that look like if we delayed this or pushed it back to staff?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. The concern would be there. These tender awards, or this tender specifically, you'll notice all the bids were very close. Within the top four were very close. We have been notified by vendors, and obviously this tender award, the validity is only for 90 days. Say, for instance, we should push this back to next year. The concern would be the cost of this tender would increase quite dramatically, simply because there's two ports to this. The municipal construction, as you know, is allowed to move forward this year. Prior to COVID, we had been notified by many of the vendors that were going to be very aggressive on this, simply for the fact that the private sector work, didn't appear to be out there all that well. And now COVID has only intensified that, because many of the private sector companies are kind of standing down this year, if you will, on construction, simply because of the financial hardship they've been suffering.
Mayor Caniff, it's Thomas Kelly, the General Manager. If I could add a couple of points, please.
Yes, please do, Thomas.
Yes, so just to put that in terms of costs, for the animal shelter, we paid close to $370 per square foot. This particular tender was at $220 per square foot. So it's significantly less than quotes we've seen in the past. The other thing is, from an operations standpoint, one of the reasons we're moving forward with this is that we're really struggling in particular to service the vehicles, in particular the fire and emergency vehicles. We presented to council of some of those struggles in really servicing the equipment in the existing facilities. So we continue to be hard pressed to really service our customers, our internal customers. And it's been a struggle for our staff, and also there's safety concerns with that as a whole. We spend a lot of time servicing these vehicles outside, sometimes in the cold winter months. So there's also a significant operational advantage by moving forward.
Thank you, Thomas. And maybe one other quick question. I know this has been dealt with, this report and this project, the last two budget seasons, I guess, right? Can you just comment on that, on how that's kind of rolled?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So in 2019, in the capital budget, and we often do this with larger projects, we put aside $1.2 million in the capital budget that was approved by council at budget. In 2019, this year, the remainder of the funds were put in the capital budget, which led to the funding that we have in place now. So it was spread out over 2 years. The first year approval allowed us to move forward with some of the architectural work. And with the approval that we received in February this year, it's allowed us to move forward with the actual tender.
Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. And thank you, Mayor Caniff. Those are all my questions.
Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I just noticed, just in the questions from Councillor Hall, which I had similar, that in administration and staff utilized the word struggle and hardship. And I completely understand the fact that this is something that is, maybe required, but is this an absolute necessity right now? Some of our businesses are going through things that, they never dreamt that they would be going through. The challenges of our community are very real. And here I'm seeing, over $4 million spend. And I just wanted to touch base with Mr. Clinton to see if he could respond regarding, since this is a capital project, is there a way, if this does not go through tonight, is there a way to ensure that other things down the list don't move up? Because I've also fielded a lot of questions from residents that are very concerned that what our community is going through, and then we're building a brand new, fleet garage. So I'd like a quick comment from Mr. Quinton, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. It's Gord Quinton, Chief Financial Officer. So first, I'd like to reiterate what Thomas had just spoken about. Here, you're looking at a $4 million, just over $4 million tenure. If COVID, this could be considered a deal to taxpayers that if without COVID or with the booming economy that was happening 3 months ago, this tender might have came in over $5 million, and so it can be seen as a savings to taxpayers of that $1 million, and it all comes down to the need. Council has approved it as a need, approved it into the capital budget, approved it for funding, and approved the design, and while we see COVID-19 as being around for the next year or two and a public health concern, it's really up to council to decide whether that trumps all the other operations and business that's done by the municipality. Council has a right to cancel the budget for this project if it wishes. That if that's your question, yes, it's in council's prerogative to take the money out of the capital budget and allocate it elsewhere if it so desires.
Thank you, Mr. Clinton. So I guess my last question to you would be to be Thomas then. So you're saying that a lot of the pricing that we might have received on this project is kind of coincides with COVID. So I didn't open it up at this exact second, but when did the bidding go out for this particular contract award?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. It's Kevin Rankin, manager again speaking. It went out in March. However, we extended it for 4 additional weeks because of COVID kind of landed in the middle of the tender.
So some of the bids that you received were pre-COVID, is that correct?
Yes, they were pre-COVID, but they were in motion pre-COVID, but the actual final numbers would come after we were in the middle of COVID. So to say the actual numbers were done prior to COVID, I can't honestly answer that because that would be up to the bidders to answer that question. I don't know when the actual numbers were crunched by those bidders.
I appreciate all the staff's responses, and I'm not going to put a motion on the floor to defer this, but what I am going to say is that I really respect the fact that this might make it easier for staff, and this might be something that we see as some see as a necessity, but unfortunately with the circumstances, and it's nothing in relation to the bid, I just cannot support an expenditure at this time, so I will not be supporting this. I appreciate that.
Councillor Solomon, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Councillor Solomon, we can't hear you if you are speaking.
I am speaking. What I'd hoped to see but didn't see under the financial implications paragraph was the savings that you would achieve through the efficiencies of having things centralized in this one office, in this one building. Are there any? And if so, what are they? And I guess why aren't they in the report? You refer to this being more efficient, but I don't see the numbers. So I'd like to see what, yeah, you got to lay some money out, and your justification at this point is, well, I think we're getting it better than we would otherwise, but I'd like to know what efficiencies this is creating and what savings we're getting from the efficiencies.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Some of the efficiencies, along with health and safety efficiencies, the supervisor currently in Chatham has to travel back and forth to Wallaceburg to oversee both operations because we only have one supervisor for both locations. This way they would be centralized. There'd be efficiencies there. That one is, hard to quantify other than travel expenditures, better operations of staff. Excuse me, I'm getting background there. The more centralized parts depot, if you will, we then have one parts staff in one central spot where they're not trying to procure parts from both locations, thus efficiencies and cost savings, because each time you go out to, be it a tender or just daily routine costs, you have no overlap of staff calling, and so there's administrative savings probably in the neighborhood of 0.5 of an FTE per on that part.
So you've got, so you've got some hourly savings because the time that somebody takes to drive out. You've got some efficiencies that are also, you're saying is also half a person. Anything else?
From a financial point,
Yes.
that would be the main ones. From the safety point, both facilities are outdated and we're having trouble with the equipment at both facilities. So we can kind of combine all the equipment from the both facilities to have better equipment all in one location. So for instance, hoists, we have one needing significant repairs done to it now. It wouldn't require that. We would have that, only need the one hoist in the one location in Chatham. So to quantify it, we anticipate annually about $150,000 savings from operational standpoint.
Okay, that's what I would have liked. That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I would have liked to have seen under financial implications, because that would also be very convincing for those of us who are trying to make a tough decision in these times. Thank you.
Councillor Latimer, followed by Councillor Wright.
Thank you through the mayor. Thank you, Councillor Solomon, for asking my question about efficiencies and cost savings. But I think it's important to note that with our limited dollars, if we're going to be spending our dollars, our limited dollars, best that we think about spending it on our local infrastructure stimulus plan. This tender is being awarded to a local contractor who employs local tradesmen who shop at our local small businesses. So I think that's important to remember, especially if we're thinking about cutting back on our infrastructure projects, which both provincially and federally, these are what is expected to give our economic recovery the boost it needs. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Wright, followed by Councillor Bondy.
Councillor Wright, we can't hear you.
There we go. Thank you, through Mayor, to Mr. Rankin. One thing that Mr. Rankin hasn't mentioned, and I've been in the garage several times, and I see employees working in the parking lot with their equipment because they don't have enough room now to work on the equipment inside. Maybe you could, Kevin could say how much you'll figure you'll save by doing more work in-house instead of sending it out to other garages too. Is there any figures there you have?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, you're totally correct. We have to send out probably 10% of our work simply because we don't have the equipment or the facilities to handle some of the bigger load weights of some of the heavier equipment now, thus the new technology snow plows, new fire trucks. We simply don't have the room inside to put them in some cases. So with this new garage, we not only it would only allow to get them all inside, but this garage also has new technology in the sense of it has an overhead crane in it, heated floors for more efficiency on the heat and hydro part of the thing as well. And yes, we would be all inside, which goes back to what we spoke of earlier in the health and safety of the employees.
Thank you, Kevin. How long will it take to build the new garage? I know the Ridgetown one's still going on, but how long will the one in Chatham take?
We've been, obviously with COVID, there was some concerns at the start. We've been assured by the vendors, in fact, more than one that bid on this, that probably a 6 to 8 month turnaround should put us in that garage.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Councillor Bondi.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just for a little bit of clarity, at the beginning of the discussion, we talked about a cost savings due to COVID, and I was, maybe it was just me, but I was a little confused as to why we're seeing these cost savings if the tender was to go out at a later date and this was deferred. Is that because the tender was out during COVID prior to the booming economy, so that this lower cost, which is what I've heard, is a result of a little more aggressiveness on the part of vendors to secure the job? Because at the beginning, I'm sorry, and again, maybe it's just me, but at the beginning of the conversation, I wasn't quite sure how that was working. So, in a nutshell, is the tender, do you believe it's lower because of COVID and because construction companies are going to be a little more anxious to find work, or not? So I think you know where I'm going with this.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I believe actually parcel, there's 2 steps on this. They were kind of ventured to say they were going to be aggressive this year anyway, just because of the state of the economy. There was some uncertainty, but then COVID probably, yes, it did intensify their need to get work. And obviously with the financials as such, the private sector companies probably aren't going to be putting out the tendering for new equipment constructions quite as aggressively as they would prior to COVID.
Okay, I think that clears it up. So we're likely getting a better deal because of COVID and because the economy's in a, I don't know what kind of word we want to use here, but a downward trend. So if we were to defer, it would likely go up. Or I guess my real question is, would it not maybe go down because the economy is going to be so struggling, the private sector particularly, in the near future? If we were to defer for even 6 months, would companies not be much more anxious and aggressive to find work? And wouldn't the cost go down if we were to put this off? Like, I would just think that a lot of private sector enterprises would likely have a lower cost in the next year because of the, tanking economy.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Well, that would be speculative at best, but that's not the indication we're getting from the vendors. They are saying that they have contracts and they feel that 2021, when the economy gets going again, they actually will be busier. That's the feeling we're getting from them now. I can't speculate on what their tender pricing may be a year from now. I honestly couldn't.
And if I could add
Well, of
again.
course, and that's, sure.
Sorry, it's Thomas Kelly from General Manager of IES. Again, if you do the math and look at the total project cost divided by the square footage, it comes out to 220 dollars per square foot. That's very competitive. We haven't seen those numbers in quite some time. We did the Public Works building just a year ago. It was closer to 235. And again, the animal shelter was at 370. So regardless, we see $220 per square foot is a very competitive price. You can see about 4 of the vendors were in that range. It even ranged as high as $2 million higher in the list of bids. So we're very comfortable to tell council that this is a very competitive bid.
Okay, that clears everything up. Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. A question for Gord. This is kind of thinking back to budget, and I know this is on the capital projects list. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was largely funded by the federal gas tax funding that was increased this year, correct? So if we were to put this off to another year, would that impact what we'd have to use that federal gas tax money for? Because I believe that's infrastructure specific.
I'd have to go back and double check that. Like I know we doubled the size of the capital budget this year, which allowed us to do a lot more things because of the doubling of the gas tax, federal gas tax a year ago that we were taking into account. So we approved $13 million of capital projects. I know this was $2 million funded from the previous year. I'm just not 100% positive if we actually dedicated gas tax funds to the other half, or whether we just were able to do other road projects, such as the Kyle Drive extension and other, the Berlin Road and Queens Line intersection, and some other ones with the gas tax money, and used our own capital funds for this. I'd have to go double check that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go to final comments from the mover and seconder, Councillor Sakachi.
I apologize, Your Worship. Just one more quick question for Kevin. Some great comments were made by Councillor Solomon as well as Councillor Wright that has me wavering a little bit. Kevin, do you know roughly what that 10% would look like in cost savings? Because hearing the statement that Councillor Solomon said that there's going to be roughly 100,000 a year in cost savings, and in addition to that 10%, can you tell me roughly what that 10% would look like?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Well, on our maintenance costs, we generally have about $3.1 million, which is spread out all over the corporate fleet. If you take 10% of that, that would be roughly $300,000.
And if I could add, please.
Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
Typically, because we are underfunded on our life cycle, often what we'll do is extend the life of our vehicles, and we will often come to council every year with an additional ask, a variable cost, because we're not fully funded. So, and that has ranged anywhere from 100,000 to about 250,000. So these efficiencies that we gain will offset that cost that we typically come in at the end of the year with.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we can put it to vote. And also, I'd like to note that Councillor Thompson has joined the meeting.
Council, just make sure that you've hit submit. All votes are in. Motion is carried. The next item on the agenda now is the financial resiliency and COVID-19. Councillor Thompson, would you like to say something here?
Yes, I have to declare a conflict on this as I'm currently employed for a lawn maintenance company that has some municipal contracts.
Thank you.
Oh, I apologize. Gord, can you do your presentation first, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Caniff. So council residents and businesses and the municipality itself are facing unprecedented expenses, loss of revenues, and job losses due to COVID-19. And the report that you have in front of you tonight is drastic, if not depressing, to both staff and the community in some respects. The reality is that although there are some limited steps happening to reopen the economy, the spring and summer of 2020 will go down in the history books as being the time everyone was asked to stay home and not get together to save lives. Many services that we deliver are not possible this year. The reality is that we cannot see a spring and summer in which you're inviting family and friends to have organized sports at our facilities, attend summer camps, swim in our public pools, or even simply play on our playground equipment. The province and Dr. Colby and public health have been clear with this message. I want to reiterate that although I authored the report, this is not singularly a cost-cutting and financial exercise. It's really the reality of the virus that congregating will not be advised. So what can we do to save the precious tax dollars that we collect from ratepayers who are also facing these financial pressures? We need to remain focused on returning to normal eventually, and as soon as we safely can proceed. But we also have to make tough decisions tonight and be honest with our residents and our many associations that use our facilities. Many youth and sports organizations need to plan for skipping the 2020 season altogether and make their own decisions on how to proceed. Soccer leagues would normally have started by now and baseball starting shortly, but under orders not to congregate and stay 6 feet apart, which will likely remain until vaccines are delivered, group sports are no longer possible this summer and perhaps even longer. In this report, we've only dealt with the finances to the end of August. We remain hopeful that we'll be able to return to regular services in the fall. But as we go through the next few months, there are likely going to be more tough decisions for council. I'd like to point out that over 250 Chatham-Kent employees have been directly impacted, along with not hiring 135 student positions this summer. Approximately 100 employees were redeployed to main essential services, and over 150 have either been on layoff or have taken leaves of absences. Administration has right-sized the staffing level to enable Chatham-Kent to keep our essential services running and to maintain the corporate operations to meet the public's and the province's expectations. We no longer have user fee revenues for recreation programs, culture, and facilities, but still have the fixed cost to maintain. The emergencies have incurred significant staffing and PPE costs. There correspondingly been a large increase in the demand of support services of the organization, being finance, human resources, legal, and ITS, to enable the front lines to continue to deliver their services to residents and many times in new ways. And there have been reductions to our investment income sources and casino revenues to deal with as well. I now want to briefly discuss what is happening at the provincial and federal level. First, the report you see in front of you tonight with the recommendations to shutter programs for the summer is identical to reports at councils across the entire country. We are all in this together, and we're all facing similar decisions. Chatham-Kent staffing adjustments that we've made are proportionally the same as similar municipalities. The impact to municipalities across Canada are mostly identical within two main categories of challenges. Chatham-Kent is in the group of municipalities that provide hundreds of services that are now affected by COVID-19. The second category are those that, in addition to those, have major transit losses as well. For example, the City of Toronto will be short in funding close to $2 billion this year alone in transit fees. So we can see the need to help the transit and non-transit service buckets independently. So since we are all relatively the same, I am requesting in recommendation number 1 that Council unanimously support backing the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, its requests for $10 billion of aid to municipalities across Canada. We need to have one united message across the country, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario has already thrown its support behind this request, as has many councils. Chatham-Kent needs to send a loud message that we support this request. The details of the FCM recommendations are on page 8 of the attached FCM document titled Protecting Vital Municipal Services. A breakdown of the proposed funding model and its calculations are on page 10. So just to explain that, what it's asking for, the base recommendation is for $35 per capita per month for 6 months. For Chatham-Kent, that would result in $22 million to cover both 2020 operational losses and to provide stimulus to the local economy on shovel-ready projects. In addition, there would be another approximately $500,000 to cover operational losses in the transit bucket. So the key to the FCM proposal is in its simplicity, its nonpartisanship, and the speed to which the funds could flow with maximum flexibility to municipalities, rather than a application-based system that may take years to sort out. I'm asking for Council to unanimously support recommendation number 1. Today at Queen's Park, Premier Ford addressed the FCM recommendations directly by stating that there are discussions taking place at the premiers and federal committees, and that to expect an announcement first from Prime Minister Trudeau in the next few weeks regarding relief for municipalities. Premier Ford went on to say that the province will then step up to fill any gaps. This is a positive indication of what is to come. I am very optimistic that financial assistance and new stimulus funding delivered through municipalities is forthcoming in the next couple months. It's just a matter of how much. Concerning recommendation number 5 on rationalizing inventory, currently there's direction approved by Council last year on how we address our underutilized facilities. With COVID-19, the utilization is now 0 in many facilities, and we are only asking Council's directions again as there's an opportunity to not reopen, and it was a timely opportunity to touch base with Council to see if there's any changes in your stance. Some final thoughts. My EMT colleagues and I want to take this chance to publicly thank every one of our employees who have faced the many recent challenges with professionalism and calm. We are a resilient community, we have resilient staff, and we're resilient financially as well. This is a major setback, but we'll get through it. And I'll pass it back to Mayor Caniff.
Okay, Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I'd like to move and put these recommendations on the floor.
Okay, can I get a seconder from Councillor Harrigan?
Are the recommendations as presented?
No, I plan to speak to that in a minute.
Okay, then I will second it, knowing what's coming in Councillor Carmen McGregor's discussions. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor C. McGregor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and through the mayor, just going through the report, and I know that it's become a very difficult time for everybody, but I would like to make some recommendations to the five that are here. Number one, I full and wholeheartedly agree on, and hope that everybody can get behind that and support. And Meredith, maybe you could put mine up. Item number 2, where we get to the second part where it says close or adjust the following services for the duration of spring, summer. I would like that changed as a recommendation, change that point to as recommended by Dr. David Colby, Medical Officer Health and of Chatham-Kent, and David Williams, Chief Medical Officer Health of the Province of Ontario, where it is feasible. And that would remove the clause that is in the middle between, I'm not sure how I go to from, okay, between L and M. There's a basically the same clause that I'm adding in there. So I would like to see that changed in number 2. And some of that is because some of these items that are in here, I understand we're going to have to close and reduce some of these programs, but I also know that different things are opening up daily as we speak. And I understand that we will not be able to complete all of these, but where possible, I think that we should be doing things to help with communities. I know in the incidents of our parks, I know we're talking about keeping those closed and cutting the grass cutting and such, or not doing grass cutting, but our provincial parks are open and summer is coming and people are going to need a place to be able to go, and people will have to become responsible to social distance. So I don't think by totally closing some of our outdoor facilities, even if we're not doing programming, that's probably the best way to go. And I think if we put a recommendation as to what Dr. Colby is saying and what the Chief Medical Officer Health is saying, that if some of that becomes available to open, then they would use that direction to do so. So that was my amendment there. I have, if you go down further, modifications to number 3, and it says 3A or 3 staff continue to be redeployed. I would like it to state qualified staff continue to be redeployed where necessary to support public health, Riverview Gardens, COVID-19, isolation shelter, and reduction of the summer students in adjusted service levels. And the reason I'd like qualified in there is simply because if we're redeploying staff, I'd like to know that the staff that are going over there to be working with our seniors are qualified staff. If we're not cutting grass, and this is a far exaggeration, but I'll use it anyway. If we're not cutting grass, I really don't want to see that the grass cutter who has no desire or knowledge to work with our elderly is being redeployed over to Riverview Gardens and is afraid of losing his job if he doesn't allow himself to be redeployed. So I think that I would like it just to stay qualified, even if it's just to soothe me. I would also like to add a 3B, and I would like I would like it to state that temporary layoffs and wage reductions be considered across the entire organization, and that a report be brought back to council at our next council meeting on May 25th. And I know that May 25th date is probably unreasonable, and I would be willing to take some guidance on that because I know the report's going soon. If it needs to be June 15th, I'm fine with that. If somebody wants to speak to that when I get through. And then down to item number 5. And this is, I would like to actually have number 5 completely removed from this motion. And part of the reason, I was actually just going to refer it back, but through discussion with Councillor Harrigan and Judy, and I guess, Judy and the mayor today, and a few others that, and I think Councillor Harrigan also spoke to Mr. Quinton, that this actual motion in here, we would actually have to put a 2/3 on the floor, because Councillor Harrigan already made a motion back in December that asked staff to work on a divestment and rationalization decision support matrix for some of our assets. And I will let Councillor Harrigan speak to that, but I would like to have item number 5 completely pulled from the report. Those
Councillor
are
Harrigan.
my amendments.
Okay, Councillor Harrigan, are you good with the changes?
Councillor Harrigan, we can't hear you.
My apologies. So yes, I am fine with those changes. I would also like to add the list in number 2F, that recreational programming, the clause be added that it be closed except for virtual recreation programming for all ages, per the conversation council had last week about digital programming opportunities.
Councillor C. McGregor, are you good with that?
Yes, I am, Mayor.
Okay, the Councillor Harrigan, the floor is yours. And then I'll go to Mr. Shropshire.
Thank you. So I guess I will start with just a quick comment on item 5, since it is removed from what is currently on the floor. I did just want to comment that council had a lot of good discussion about infrastructure and what divestment meant and how that related to our term priorities. And in October, I remember the meeting well, because it was actually when we had a meeting in Tilbury. There was unanimous agreement by council to move forward with a different approach to really looking at what I had described as a bird's eye view towards our asset management and infrastructure. And then in December, when a report came back around the time and effort that would take for all of our assets, council again unanimously agreed that it was still worth it for us to, again, change our approach to how we look at asset management. And we directed administration to look at specifically the community of Wallaceburg and specific assets in that community in support of some of the initiatives that I know Councillor McGregor and Councillor Hall are working on with the community hub in that area. And I can only assume that work has progressed in that per council's direction, and think that it's important that we continue to stay the course around this infrastructure, and making sure that we really truly understand across the community as a whole what our infrastructure is, rather than reverting back to community consultations, putting the onus back on communities to try to defend, keeping or maintaining their assets and service levels. And I don't think that that's a conversation that needs to be had because of, we don't need to revert back just because of the urgency that COVID-19 may present for us. I think item 5 actually doesn't belong in this report right now. So that's for that, but that's not the subject of what we're going to be talking about with the recommendations on the floor. So I do have some questions through the mayor to Dr. Redyke regarding what some of the health and wellness implications would be to some of these closures. And specifically in the summertime, my questions are around what the plans are or potential plans would be for the municipality with heat waves or heat warnings if these buildings are closed, the arenas, libraries, pools, etc. Do we have or have we started to think about what the municipality can offer to residents so that they could escape the heat when needed during times of heat waves?
So through you, Mayor Caniff, it's April Redyke, General Manager, Community Human Services. Thank you, Councillor Harrigan, for the question. I think as we move forward through COVID-19, we are only just starting to see a flattening of that curve. It will still take some time until we see that curve begin to go down. And as more things open, more businesses more opportunities for residents open, we will undoubtedly see that we have an increase in cases of COVID-19 in our community. What I think we need to think about is balancing the safety of maintaining social distancing, all of the public health measures that we are currently exhibiting throughout our community. It's what has kept our numbers relatively low compared to individuals around us, with everything else that might happen. And so in multiple conversations, both with Dr. Colby, with our public health colleagues across the province, we are really looking at the biggest thing that we have to avoid as we come down this curve is any type of program, activity, facility that promotes the congregating of people. And so that will be a hard balance for us to look at. And as the province begins to open buildings up, let's take libraries as an example. It's a great one to look at. While we might be allowed to open that library, we will probably not be allowed to run any programming. So we will be able to have individuals go in and out, check books in and out, get some quick questions answered, but get out of the heat, so to speak, for a bit. But we won't be doing children's reading programs or summer reading programs. Those kinds of things will more than likely not be allowed. So when we look at plans in the event of some weather issues, certainly that will be balanced with putting that alongside COVID-19, the risks that are going on in our community at that time, and how we really look at offsetting that. We don't want to keep things closed if it is safe to open them, and safety will be our number one kind of factor and priority. So everything on the list certainly needs to be looked at. We will look at even suggestions around, if the beaches open. So let's say the province allows beaches to be open, then we will have public health messaging to ensure social distancing, to ensure parents are aware of watching their children, making sure they're not kind of congregating and maintaining that safety above all else. So yes, it's on our minds, but certainly stopping COVID-19 will be first and foremost as we come down this curve. So I'll stop there and see if that helps or not.
Thank you. No, certainly as we approach the summer weather, we will see if we need to identify other opportunities to help our populations. And I'm especially thinking about our senior population to stay out of the heat. So look forward to some of that and wanted to make sure that that was brought forward from awareness and age-friendly perspective. My next question through the mayor is to Mr. Kelly. I'm wondering if you can speak about the reduced services, particularly around grass cutting. There were lots of comments and feedback that I received that expressed concern around, the current level of service for grass cutting, particularly in cemeteries, wanting to make sure that we're not going to not have grasses cut. Is the reduced service levels really a focus on sports fields, or is it really, all grass trimming uniformly across the municipality? Because I'm concerned that this reduction in service level, despite the fact that we still need to socially isolate ourselves from each other and stay distant, we still want to make sure that our communities have a neat and tidy appearance.
Thank you, Mayor. So the reduction, just to confirm, would not occur in cemeteries. So we have different service levels that, depending on what the venue is. And cemeteries, for example, are the highest service level. It depends on the overall height of the grass, but also it's the frequency of the cut. So there would be no change in service level with some of our high priority areas, which would be cemeteries for sure. We are primarily focused on sports fields and parklands, and the concept being that, for example, soccer fields are not being used. So that was an A++ rating cut for us, very high frequency because they're regularly used, but because they're not being used, we would reduce the number of cuts. So the grass would grow longer, same for baseball fields and etc. Thank you.
And can you confirm for me, Mr. Kelly, just in follow-up, that if there are residents who have concern with grass because their grass, for example, along the roadways or boulevards or some of the areas that we've had challenge issues with in the past, they're still able to, email CK Info and put in a ticket for it to express concern. So that could be attended to. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's really, this is what we're asking council, is that we are reducing our service level on our trimming. Things will not look as good as they normally do in the summer. And when we receive those calls, we don't have the staff that we used to have in place. So effectively, our service level will be going down. So we will try to manage everything by priority, but because of these cuts, you will not see the same level of service on grass trimming and so on that you have in the past.
Okay, thank you. I just want to comment that I very much appreciate Councillor C. McGregor's addition with 3B. I recognize that we are needing to put things forward to council very quickly to respond to COVID, but I really look forward to more of a deep dive understanding around implications for staffing and cost savings in that measure. So thank you. Those are all the comments that I have for now.
Mr. Shropshire, then followed by Mr. Quinton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to the discussion we just had, I want to acknowledge that the administration recognizes fully that there's been huge hardship in our community, and that a lot of our residents are saying, what can the municipality do to contribute or share some of the burden? As we've just heard from the last few minutes of conversation, the two major areas where the municipality spends money does deal with staffing levels or staff costs, and also with our infrastructure costs. So we recognize that. We're prepared to make adjustments or recommendations to council as to how we can contribute. But I'd like to point out that our staffing costs are directly tied to service levels. And Councillor Harrigan's comments about the grass cutting is a perfect example. If council wants us to save money, we can do that by cutting back on service levels, such as closing a facility or reducing the levels of service. That's 100% council's decision, but there is a direct relationship. Initially, we reported to council on April the 6th, and we identified at that time that at the outset, we had a number of major impacts on our staffing. Those programs and services that we were asked to close or directed to close by the province of Ontario because there were too many people gathered in the same spot, those are typically all the programs that rolled up enhance our quality of life and the enjoyment of our citizens. But those are also some of the programs that people might say are non-essential. Virtually all of the other services that the municipality continues to provide are deemed essential services, and we've indicated to council that there's been in fact a substantial increase in some of those areas, and Riverview Gardens, public health, employment and social services, economic development and building development, all of those have witnessed a large increase in the level of activity that they've had to deal with. So as we're going forward, the types of recommendations that you're receiving this evening for us to maintain programs closed throughout the summer or to reduce those levels of activity, or an attempt to based on the best advice we have from Dr. Colby, as Councillor McGregor had mentioned, Councillor Colby's advice was that we probably will not see any large group activities opening before September the 1st. That was one of the rationales for us putting the A through L list that's part of recommendation number 2. So I think, staff will come back to council as directed. We'll provide recommendations on each of these areas, but we are going to be seeking direction from council to say, where are you prepared to accept service level reductions? I think the last piece, without sounding cavalier about it, there's an expression that I've heard a lot of over the last couple of months, and it's don't waste a good crisis. There are a number of substantial improvements and adaptations that the municipal staff have made to how to deliver services more efficiently. Examples of people paying bills online rather than accepting payments. It reduces our security concerns for collecting cash. It also is more efficient, and it's cheaper for us to be able to deliver the services. Those are some of the things that we'd want to continue on with on a go-forward basis. And even though it's been a bit of a change and challenge for some of our residents and our staff, the adaptations we made, and we'd want to continue with that. So with that, Your Worship, I'll just again ask for council's direction where you're prepared to deal with the service level cuts and reductions in infrastructure, and we will come back to you with an honest recommendation to where we can help make the contribution that the residents and council are asking for. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Quinton, followed by Ms. Hoffman to discuss the May 25th timeline for 3B.
Thank you, Mayor Cannon. I just wanted to comment on number 2. Just some of the reasoning behind some of our thinking. I'm not disagreeing with the changes that were made, but just to talk out an example, when we're talking about outdoor pools, for example, the change that has been suggested by Councillor Carmen McGregor puts it back into the hand of public health, which I agree with. But at some point in time, you have to make the business decision as well. So if I use the example of outdoor pools, of course, if Dr. Colby said this week that outdoor pools are fine, well, we could very quickly turn our minds to getting the pools ready for opening in June like we normally do. If Dr. Colby or the province gives that notification on July the 20th, and it will take 1 or 2 weeks to get the pools opened, and we have to hire all the summer lifeguards that we aren't hiring this year, all of a sudden it becomes a very costly exercise to only have a pool open for a couple weeks. So that was some of the reasons behind the 2 categories. But overall, I get the overall direction is where possible. If Dr. Colby said it was okay for soccer, for example, to start up in August, well, it's quite easy for us to cut the grass one more time and open the soccer fields. So it will sort of very business to business on what we can and can't open up quickly if we were allowed to. That's all. Thanks.
Ms. Hoffman, and then followed by Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to the time frame on the report, tomorrow is the deadline for submission for reports for the May 25th meeting. With Council's indulgence, I would ask if we could perhaps move this to the meeting after that, which would be June the 15th, please.
Councillor C. McGregor, are you okay with that?
Yes, yeah, and I do understand that when I originally had these modifications, I didn't realize the reports were due tomorrow. So I'm quite happy to extend that to get a good report back. Thank you.
And Councillor Harrigan, are you good with the change?
Yes, fine with me. Thank you.
Okay, over to Councillor Solomon, followed by Councillor Latimer.
Thank you, Your Worship. In late March, I sent an email memo to senior administration requesting this type of report. And I must say I'm quite quite pleased with what's come back in the report. I agree that you're doing right sizing and staff. But also the practicality of it is some are not working, but those who are working more hours, and they're working in more difficult and somewhat dangerous conditions. So therefore under a lot more stress than they would otherwise be. Even the municipal council is meeting more than it had otherwise scheduled to meet. And hopefully, except for tonight, we've been meeting even longer in the meetings. I just don't see how we can have it both ways. I don't see how we can tell administration we have to be careful and reduce costs because we know that expenses are going to be up as a result of this and revenues are going to be far down. I think you got to be realistic and realize that it's a changed world. You're not going to see perfectly trimmed grass everywhere. I agree that at the cemeteries, that's a good place to keep the same standard that we've had. But I think we all have to understand the reality that you can't have it both ways. One thing I didn't see, Gord, in the report on the revenue reductions was you say that we are going to have a revenue reduction as a result of property tax deferrals. But what I've seen when there were past financial crises, and none as bad as this, when we had crazy high interest rates and people were losing their houses and builders going out of business. And then later when we saw the death of the North American manufacturing plants, people didn't pay their taxes. And I didn't see you specifically cite that in your report. And that can be a pretty big loss of revenue in the first year. So I hope you will consider that. I also hope that you're going to, this is just this report. I hope we have another one in August also, at the end of August, because things are changing all the time. There's one other warning that I want to sort of put out there for councillors to think about and staff to think about, and that is next January, February, when we come into budget. It's fine to say that we're doing all these things, but you can hardly look to the people who have been unemployed or underemployed for since COVID-19 hit us and say, oh, we're going to go back to normal services now, and you're now going to have a tax increase. I think it's a double whammy, and you got to start thinking about that right now, because that dog ain't going to hunt come January, February. So that's all I have to say. I would support the report that Gord Quinton brought forward. I'm not so keen on some of the additions. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Latimer, followed by Councillor Pinsino.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I will be supporting this report as amended by Councillor McGregor. And I had a couple of questions, though, particularly with regard to the services again. We said cancellation of hiring summer students. I thought we were receiving monies through both, I think it's federal or provincial, I'm not sure, with regard to having money for summer students and keeping them employed.
Thank you, Mayor Kenneth. Kathy can perhaps confirm this, but we normally do receive like normally every year receive a small subsidy for hiring students. But if you're referring to the recent announcements of hiring of where the federal government is helping out businesses to hire students or the 75% wage study subsidy in hiring, that municipalities are not eligible for that. So we would be going on our own. The the savings on just the students are alone are over $1 million for that 135 students.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Quinton. I would expect that I understand, staff costs are directly tied to service levels, and so we would expect that our service levels would decrease. But I would also expect that staff would work with our current community partnerships and look for new community partnerships that would help compensate and offset anticipated municipal service reduction. And I think our residents would expect that as well. And I didn't see that anywhere in here. So I'm wondering, is there cost to that, or what would be the efficiencies saved?
Thank you, Councilor Latimer. Can you give an example of activity that you're thinking about?
Well, one would be, you're going to get rid of the horticultural flower planting and maintenance. A lot of the BIAs do that, and we help with hanging the flower pots, and sometimes it's different across all the smaller communities. But that would be one area. And also, I would think grass cutting would be another. Recreation would be another. Some of the service levels could be helped out, because there are currently other not-for-profit and volunteer services that are directly providing services in these same areas that we could maybe offset our service reduction.
Thank you, Councilor Latimer, for explaining that more. So when you get into the recreation and stuff, we're back to the medical officers of health saying that we can't gather anyway, right?
Well,
so that's where that runs into that roadblock. But as for, with grass cutting, we've contracted out. We have signed contracts on who's cutting the grass for each park and things like that. Yes, we have the ability to change the level of service, as Thomas has suggested. But I don't think we're able to have volunteers cut grass in our parks, for example. As far as the flowers, I do want to point out that the flowers are dealt with differently in each community. In many of them, it is area rated, and that the funds actually do flow to community groups that actually do the planting. So in many towns that will continue. In Chatham, there is no community group that was looking after the flowers, so that was done by a crew of students. There may be limited capabilities on doing perhaps an odd flower bed here and there with staff that we have, but there isn't the ability to maintain them throughout the summer. So when you get to talking about hanging baskets in the downtown or Chatham stuff where they need to be watered 3 times a week, that was done by that student crew and all that maintenance. So there may be some things that can be done, but it would be on a very limited basis. Now, as far as if there's a volunteer group that wants to safely at social distancing standards do some of that work, I guess we'd have to have that discussion, or perhaps Thomas can comment on that.
Well, I'd like to suggest that, again, we have a point person at the municipality for volunteer organizations and or individuals who would be ready to enter into a municipal partnership to complete some of these tasks, or keeping in mind social distancing. But there may be people out there, and I know there are, because we've had a couple of projects done down in South Kent, that were not getting done through our usual processes. And we had a volunteers that set up a municipal partnership and got a community project done and completed within a weekend. And so we have some pretty innovative and spirited people in this community, and they have a lot of pride in our municipality. So I think it would behoove us to set up a point person at least, where people could contact and talk about areas where they would like to help offset some of the ramifications of these service reductions we're talking about tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Pinsino, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with the changes that Councillor McGregor has made to this. I had an issue with number 2 and number 5 as well. In my opinion, we're doing everything on number 2 now because of the state of the province during this pandemic. The reality is we're only 2 months into this pandemic, and I know we need to prepare, but I'm not comfortable doing too far off base until we have a better idea of where we stand. As it reads now, as she's got it, it's the door is still open and it's not permanent. We should have an idea of how much surplus we'll have at the end of the third quarter. Like, we're usually pretty close. And honestly, with our winter budget, being so good this year and over $1 million in part-time help, honestly, we should have enough surplus to cover what our debts are going to be due to this pandemic, or at least a good portion of it. Happy to see number 5 removed. We've done this several times, and nobody has the will to close certain facilities in their communities. Traditionally, it's more into the rural area. My fear is the pandemic will be used to go and close some of these facilities that some have wanted gone for a while. So I'm just happy to see that one gone. We'll deal with that animal by itself. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Kelly. Question on the grass cutting. We have contractors on contract. Does this in any way affect their what they signed and what we agreed to pay by reducing the grass cutting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So no, the contracts that we have in place, it allows us to adjust accordingly with the conditions that we've put forward here tonight.
Okay, and second one, because you've left that pretty wide open, and I'm going to use my home community as an example, the town hall. That's kind of like the corner stone of the community, and it's been reduced in grass cutting too. I actually dealt with this just before this report come out. When you have something like that, is it because you had said you're not, some you are, some you aren't? I guess, can we have that conversation where it's left alone just because it is such a high visual place in our community?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So again, it's back to the service discussion. If we're, and maybe it would be best for council to define for us where you do not wish to see a service reduction in grass cutting, for example. We've made the recommendation, sport field, parklands, but overall we're going to have less staff with this proposal, so we can't possibly keep the same level of service. And if, of course, with grass, it's always dependent on how much rain we get. And, it could be a case where if we have a relatively dry spring, which we've had so far, and maybe a dry summer, you won't see the difference. But if we have a very wet remainder of spring and summer, it's definitely going to have an impact. We just can't keep up with the number of staff that we have unless we're prepared to pay overtime, and then there's no savings. So well, a lot of the suggestions here in the report are related to the students Within my organization alone, we employ well over 50 students, primarily in public works and also in parks and rec. And this is some of the primary work that they do. They take care of the flowers, they do the weeding, they do a lot of the trimming in the downtown areas. And our proposal here is to, in an effort to save money, that we would make a conscious decision to reduce that level of service.
Okay, I wasn't aware that any of our in-house staff cut grass. I thought that was all done by contractors.
That's correct. We do the trimming though, which is the weed whacking around the specific areas in the downtowns, around parking lots. Our teams are out there as well. Anything you see downtown where you see weeds coming out of the concrete sidewalks, we're pulling those as well. So it's that type of maintenance. You're correct. The only grass cutting that we do are along the roadside ditches.
Right. So what I'm saying in the example I've used, on high traffic areas, like, as you've left that wide open, reduced service level of grass trimming, which is fine. But as long as they're not going to go after our, because I had that conversation with Mr. Bray on Tuesday, and he just said they were reducing everything, right, straight across the board. I just want to make sure that we're not going to make our communities look shaggy by trying to save a cut a month or something.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is our proposal, though, is that we actually make that conscious decision that we used to describe it as an A cut, and now it'll be a B cut, which is less frequent. So if council are not comfortable with that, and they wish to maintain the downtown course with the same level of service, we need to come back then with a new figure and a new plan, because it will mean that we have to hire primarily a lot of these students that do that work now.
But through you, your mayor, to Thomas, right now you're saying sports fields and parklands. So that's not including town halls and whatever have you. So, but you have consciously done that. It isn't so much in the words here, but you have consciously done that, or told the contractors to do that.
That's correct. The only service level with grass that we're keep maintaining is essentially cemeteries.
Okay, but it
because
doesn't
of the
say that.
nature of the product, yeah. And everywhere else where we can, we are reducing the number of cuts.
Okay, but it doesn't say that in that report. And what I'm saying, if you have a high traffic area, can that be changed? Why would that have to come back to council?
The reason is that Mr. Quinton's recovery of the $2 million noted is based on assumptions from my team that we are reducing the number of cuts. So we made an assumption, and again, it's an estimation, because if we do get a lot of rain, we could have the same number of cuts as last year, for example, but still had less service. So it's an estimation, but based on the contracts that we have put out there and our estimations, is that we are moving forward with a reduction in service of some of those areas where we do cut the grass or we trim in the different areas, and with the contractors as well. Our contractors, for example, on the soccer fields, they will not be out on the soccer fields that they normally would. So it's the same concept everywhere. We would cut grass, parks as well, right? We're trying to keep it at a safe level, meaning that we don't want grass growing at 8 inches, but we're certainly not keeping it to the pristine level that we've seen in the past.
Okay, I just think we're going to have a lot of money left in surpluses here, just because of everything being shut down, and I think we're splitting hairs here on the grass cutting. All right, thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor B. McGregor, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just to follow up on Councillor Pinson's comment about that surplus, maybe a question to Gord on when we receive that figure typically, and knowing that we have been in a surplus position in the past few years, is that something that we're planning to apply to that COVID-related shortfall?
Thanks, Mayor Caniff. I believe you're referring to our 2019 final financial reporting and the final surplus.
Yeah.
we're tentatively scheduled to be coming to council at the July council meeting. The surplus is it's a little bit too early to tell. We're need a few more weeks so we have the actual surplus available. But it's looking in the range like it was the previous year. However, if you recall, during budget, we allocated quite a large chunk of it to the roadside drainage issue. So I am expecting a surplus that will be able to, that would normally get allocated to your strategic reserve that may be available to cover some 2020 losses instead. That will mean that you won't have it in your strategic reserve to do the things that council wants to do with a strategic reserve. But when I'm talking about still being $1 million short here, that there may be $1 million in the 2019 surplus that will be able to cover it. It's just too early for me to totally commit to that until we get through a few more weeks of our accounting work.
Yeah, and just sort of as Councillor Solomon had noted, is this the type of report we can expect to see some periodic updates as some of these changes are taking place, as we're receiving more information from the province, the federal government?
Yes, so both the province and federal government are coming out with new programs and new regulations, changes in regulations daily, right? On the public health front and on funding to help businesses and individuals across the country. A lot of the announcements in April's area they've made changes in regulations at Review Gardens and with the public health with expectations of funding to come, but a lot of those details still are not available exactly. If you think of land ambulances, council added the supervisor a few meetings ago, an extra supervisor during COVID-19. We're hoping that is 100% funded. We're at least hoping it's at least the 50-50 cost share, but hopefully it's 100% funded. Medivie is also spending a tremendous amount of extra dollars in PPE. We're hoping that that's 100% funded. We don't know though. We've got indications from the province that there's funding coming for land ambulance, but to what percent we have no idea. So there's literally hundreds of estimates in this, and as time goes on, those estimates will get firmed up. The next we would be having all our senior staff do a June variance at the end of June, first couple weeks of July, that we'd be reporting at that August council meeting. So that's really when we're going to have, at that August council meeting, not only will we know where our prior year surplus was at the July meeting, we'll know where we're at, and we'll also have an idea of what the fall looks like by August too, and whether we're, are we opening arenas this fall? That'll be the next major decision for council, depending on what our public health experts are advising at that time.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and you can imagine how many changes we've seen in the past 3 months. So thinking about 3 months from now, who knows what else we could see as changes. And I do think that we skimmed over kind of quickly in the recommendations, but I do think number one is really important that we're part of. So looking at this report and seeing the impact on Chatham-Kent, while it's large, I was a little bit surprised it wasn't larger. Even looking just east to London, they're about 4 times our population, and I think their estimation was about a $30 million hole in their budget. So I think a lot of municipalities are, and certainly we see it through social media accounts of some municipal politicians, that they're really pushing to see some feedback and some certainty in federal and provincial support. The other comment I had is I was supportive of the leaving off number 5. We received an email from the group, the Economic Recovery Task Force, requesting that we defer that portion. So I think it makes sense that we're leaving that off the table for now. And with respect to the changes on number 3, I think they're substantive, but I do think it's sort of an opportunity to do what we've been talking about in this report, is really better connect the concept of service level and staff changes. So I do see it as an opportunity to get some feedback on what's already been done and really link those staff numbers to what services have been changed, and then to really understand what further changes look like, and even to have a better understanding of what redeployment has been and how we've been managing that. So understanding that doesn't give a direction of change necessarily, but I think does provide us with some of the information that particular public's asking for, so that we can understand the impact of some of the changes that have occurred or could occur in the future. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Wright.
Thank you, through your worship. I just had a couple questions here. So, Mr. Quinton, what I'm gathering here is that what you're indicating is that, you know, if some direction comes down from the province or from Dr. Colby, and we're able to you know, revisit some of these aspects, we will. It's just that if it doesn't make sense and it's not feasible, for instance, if it's an outdoor pool, we're not going to be opening it for 3 weeks. It's just not. You know, from a cost standpoint, it's just not an economic decision. So you know, there is the availability to relook at some of these aspects if the direction's changed. Is that correct?
Absolutely, as April had stated in her comments too, earlier tonight. It's all about safety and whether people can get together, and if you know, I don't have the crystal ball what's going to happen with COVID-19. If it evaporates in the summer, like some might say, and disappears, well, of course, maybe we'll be fine and be able to have a late summer, fall baseball and soccer leagues up and running and things like that.
No, for sure.
So those are relatively easy to get back going again, right?
Exactly. So my comment was just mostly directed towards the fact that these aren't something, by supporting this, you know, the financial resiliency, is that it's not something that we can't revisit if the direction completely changes. And I know that some programs, obviously, the later we go, for instance, soccer, you know, once it becomes mid-July, it's probably not going to be something that is going to be able to proceed anyways, because I know there's some direction. I think I read today from, you know, Ontario Soccer that they're postponing it to at least July 1st, if I read it correctly. And then the other aspect, that I have a couple of questions from the community. So this one, I guess, could be answered by yourself or Mr. Kelly, and it kind of piggybacks off Councillor McGregor's comments. So what about the surplus this year? I know it's a bad time to ask a question because of yesterday, but the surplus of snow maintenance. Obviously, we had a very good year this year. Do we have a surplus in the snow maintenance? Or is that too early to tell?
Yeah, it's so first of all, our snow budget is based on annuals. So yes, we had a very good January, February, March, but it's also based on November and December. So it is a bit early to tell. It certainly looks favorable. We have had other expenses, though, as you're very aware, out on Erie Shore Drive and all along Lake Erie, in fact, that is biting into that too. So unfortunately, it's difficult until the year is up. We can really accurately state what our snow budget will end up at.
I appreciate that. I'm very in favor of Councillor McGregor's initiative to review the number 5. I didn't plan on supporting that aspect as it stands. The other comment I have, Mr. Kelly, is towards number 4. I've had some pretty large contractors in the area reach out regarding the fact that they wanted to ensure that the municipality is still going to be shovel ready on a lot of their road and upgrade contracts. Is that something that we are still on pace to be presented when the time comes due?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So My team overall, engineering, any engineering work, roads, bridges, we are still proceeding full steam ahead. And that was approved by the province as well. So we have not delayed any projects whatsoever. We have gone out with our tenders based on the current situation and given our contractors some flexibility because it's difficult to commit to the time. But as far as the engineering behind that, that's what we're doing. We're getting everything shovel ready until everything is a go and clear on the COVID situation.
Appreciate that. And my last two questions towards yourself, Mr. Kelly, is, for instance, like the indoor pool and the arenas. So obviously the upkeep of those aspects are going to be a little bit different, you know, weighing in on the fact, is there going to be, or is there not going to be, you know, utilization of them? So how are you looking at the indoor pool? So basically, if something does change, as Dr. Redek was saying, if something does change, those pools would still be able to, the indoor pools would still be able to basically become in use pretty quickly upon direction of the province and Dr. Colby. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is correct. Right now, we are doing some maintenance. We're doing some health and safety, correcting health and safety issues on our pools. And it's our intention to complete this now in the downtime so that when we get the go ahead, we can start up very quickly.
And then my last question in regards to the arena. So I know that some, you know, generally speaking, the ice would be getting ready to go in soon for, you know, the some skates and tryouts. So how are you guys revisiting the, you know, the arenas specifically? Is the ice, you know, going to be delayed in putting in so that you guys can save on utilities? How are you guys looking at that from a cost savings perspective?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at this time, our assumption goes out to the arenas are closed until the end of August. That's what we're looking at right now. So we will revisit this as conditions change. And our assumption is that we will reopen in September pending the COVID is all clear.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Kelly. That's exactly what I was looking for. Just so, you know, a lot of the minor hockey teams could hear that, you know, unless direction changes really rapidly, that, you know, there's going to be basically no utilization of the arenas till September. So I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Councillor Wright, followed by Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. This is towards Mr. Quinton. We leased out the marina and the campground at Mitchell's Bay. Are we doing a cost cutting for him to help him out? Because he's not being able to open his business here this year. So I don't think it'd be fair to charge him full lease if he can't run his business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I think Thomas is probably the best one to answer that one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at this time, we've had no discussions with the current provider out at Mitchell's Bay. They have a lease and they've been honoring that lease.
That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Foss, followed by Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Councillor Foss, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I forgot to turn on the mic. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Most of my questions have been answered, especially the one about the infrastructure, that it is still going to proceed as scheduled, such as road work. There should be no slowdowns in that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's Thomas Kelly, General Manager of IES, and that is correct. Road work, we have commitments in place. They are also an essential service, so they have the go-ahead to move forward. That's for all road work, so no change there. And we have been bringing those reports to council. You'll see another one in a couple of weeks. Secondly is on the bridge work. That's been a little bit more challenging for us, so that we haven't got confirmed times because of some of the social distancing requirements with bridges, but we're looking at that. As far as the engineering behind them, though, we are moving ahead very rapidly to get these projects shovel ready.
Okay, thank you. And my next question is roadside grass cutting in the rural area. I know that we get a lot of complaints because of that not being done. That will not be affected by this.
It's Thomas Kelly again. That's correct. The roadside cuts will not be affected, but however, the grass trimming associated with that in the tighter spots in any type of the downtowns that our students typically do, that will be impacted. But the roadside grass cutting remains as previously defined.
Okay, and that's where I was concerned about the rural roadside grass cutting, because I know the farmers get a little upset at the weeds and that get a little too high. So I'm pleased to hear that that's not going to be affected. Thank you.
Councillor Kirkwood White, followed by Councillor Finn.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. My comments are not necessarily related to grass cutting or services that require unionized staff or qualified professionals. I'd just like to follow up on a couple of comments that Councillor Latimer made with regard to the opportunity to partner with folks in the nonprofit sector. And I think most people will know, it's no surprise that I'm an advocate for local volunteers and grassroots leadership. We enjoy a very vibrant voluntary and nonprofit sector here in Chatham-Kent. And I'm really hoping that the Economic Development Task Force that will be reporting back on May the 25th will no doubt have some recommendations to help us transition out of this COVID pandemic. And I'm really hoping that there'll be an opportunity perhaps to create some kind of a list of services that could be undertaken by community volunteers. I believe with all my heart that if we made such a list, there would be people that would step up to help. And, you know, unlike other situations, this one is unique. And we may very well find that there will be people who will be more than happy to help.
Councillor Finn.
Through you, Mayor. Mine is with regards to grass cutting. Most of my other questions have been answered. I understand the parklands and stuff like that and the rural roads. Mine is around the business park areas, especially Blenheim. I'm just wondering if that is going to be kept to a length where we don't have another snake issue that arises.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is correct. We will keep that to a situation where that problem will not exist again.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote. Note that there's items 1 through 4, that 5 is not, you're not voting on number 5.
So everybody push the submit button. Waiting for one more. All votes are in. Motion passes.
Okay, we'll move to item 14, notices of motion.
Mayor Caniff, we have received one from Councillor Hall. It states, I, Councillor Aaron Hall, hereby provide notice that I will bring forward the following motion at the May 25th, 2020 council meeting for discussion and voting. Whereas council has made an effort and commitment to support community groups across Chatham-Kent, and whereas the municipality has worked in partnership with the Wallaceburg Kinsman Club for several years to handle bookings for their community center, and whereas this public use agreement with the Kinsman is set to expire this year, Therefore, be it resolved that administration investigate and provide options for council to consider for this event booking agreement to continue, not only with the Wallaceburg Kinsmen, but with other community groups across Chatham-Kent. A staff report will be brought back to council on or before the August 10th, 2020 council meeting. That's all we've received, Mayor Caniff.
Okay, we'll move on to item 15, closed session reports. Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I would move that we accept the closed session report of Monday, May 27th, and also May 4th, 2020. The April 27th meeting, council directed administration on proposed disposition of land by the municipality with regard to land lease portion 25302 Big Point Road, Dover Township, section 2392C of the Municipal Act. We received advice that was subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to Ridge Landfill, section 2392F Municipal Act, and proposed acquisition of land by the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to surplus St. Clair Catholic School Board properties, specifically St. Joseph Catholic School, 25 Raleigh Street, Chatham, section 2392C and F of the Municipal Act. On May 4th, absent was Councillor Oche, and council received information on personal matters about an identifiable individual and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to an integrity commissioner investigation, section 2392B and F of the Municipal Act, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with regard to Chatham-Kent Lake Erie Shoreline Studies, section 2392 and F of the Municipal Act.
Councillor Crew, will you second that?
Yes, I will.
Okay, we'll put it to vote.
One more. All votes are in. Motion passes.
Item 16, communication items. Councillor Hall, can get a motion for you to accept?
Yes, absolutely, Mayor Caniff.
Councillor Harrigan, can I get will you second that?
Sure thing.
Okay, anyone opposed? Hearing none, carried. Item 17, non-agenda business. Councillor, oh, here we go. The board's lighting up. Councillor C. McGregor, followed by Councillor Oche.
Thank you, and through the mayor. I was just wondering if we could get an update if the negotiations have been completed for the RFP for the baseline bridge in Wallaceburg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The negotiations are continuing. We do not have a commitment at this time.
Thank you.
Councillor Oche, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to remind everyone of May 16th Miracle Food Donations this Saturday at noon. In the Tilbury area will be from 12 to 4 o'clock for drop-off for our 4 drop-off locations. As well, we'll be doing the Lighthouse Cove and the drop-off location in Comber. So please, everyone that can help, please do so. Thanks very much.
Councillor B. McGregor, followed by Councillor Sakachi.
Thanks, Mayor Caniff. And just to piggyback off of what Councillor Oche just mentioned, a great event going on in the community. There's been lots of examples of the community coming together. And I wanted to point out an article in the Chatham Voice titled Tags of Hope And many of you have probably noticed the duct tape slogans up throughout our community on different buildings, and that's thanks to local artist Mark Reinhardt, who's also a municipal employee of ours. He's been doing that throughout the community, and people have been allowing spaces to be used to show that our community is sticking together through these rough times, and just wanted to take a moment to recognize his efforts and all the efforts in our community to get through this. Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Hall.
Thank you, through your worship. My comments have already been made. Just want to reiterate the May 16th miracle. Hopefully everybody that can participate will, and I just wanted to thank the organizers for this fabulous platform to unite our community.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I was hoping to give the floor to our Fire Chief, Chris Case, to address the issue about the suspension of issuing recreational fire permits. I know I've fielded a number of questions and concerns about this, and I have to commend Chief Case and Public Educator Whitney Burke for handling all the concerns that I've forwarded to them, and I'm sure they've heard others. So thank you for that. But Chief Case, can you give an update on this situation? I understand you have a bit of an update that's forthcoming.
Through you, Mayor Caniff. Well, thank you for your kind words, Councillor Hall. As you will know, it's 2 months ago nearly since we started taking some significant changes to our operation to ensure the health, safety and welfare of not only the community but our staff. And I'm pleased to tell you that we have done a great deal of work on our operational procedures, and the command staff have been able to supply themselves with a comfortable supply of PPE. So with that in mind, as of midday tomorrow, we will be lifting the suspension of open air burn permits. Up to this point, the municipality had issued 81 burn permits, and people will be free to utilize the open air burn pits and apply for other permits as of tomorrow afternoon. And thank you to all members of council and partners who have provided us some support at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Case, that's some great news. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of excited people there, and you'll see probably a lot of fires tomorrow night. Anyways, we'll move to the reading of the bylaws first. Sorry, we'll move to the reading of the bylaws first and second reading. Councillor Solomon.
Moved.
Councillor Oche. Can you second that?
Yeah, I will.
Anyone opposed? Carried. Third and final reading, Councillor Finn. Will you put a motion forward?
Happy to make that motion.
Councillor Foss, will you second that?
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, last resolution, council in closed session and adjournment. Oh, sorry, anyone opposed to that? The clerk is keeping me in line here on that one. Okay, item 19, resolution council in closed session and adjournment. Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you. And through the mayor, I would move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, May 25th, 2020, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
Okay, Councillor Wright, will you second that?
I'll second that, Mayor Caniff. Thank you.
Excellent. Anyone opposed? Hearing none. Thanks everyone for a great meeting tonight, and have a great night.